Somebody recently exclaimed at the fact that I could relate the pelvic floor to just about anything, and that's probably true. I'm pretty passionate when it comes to the core and floor, so I wanted to take a few minutes just to kind of explain why that is and just the number of different areas of our life that our core and pelvic floor health can impact on. Now, as I show you these things, some of them have a two-way arrow on them where the issue themselves can impact the core and floor, but equally the core and floor can reverberate and reflect back on that issue. So let's start with pressure management. All too often people assume that issues, particularly with their pelvic floor, relate to weakness, whereas actually it may be an issue with pressure management, which is why we can't just look at your abdominals, we can't just look at your pelvic floor, and we can't just look at your back. We've got to look at all of them working together and how you're managing pressure in that area of your body. Leading on from that is everyday movement, whether that is lifting up children, lifting up a basket full of washing, lifting the shopping into the boot of the car, whatever that is for you. Your core and floor may impact on your ability to do those tasks, but equally what you're doing every day can really affect your core and floor and may lead to issues such as pelvic floor weakness, leakage, prolapse, low back pain, etc., etc. So that also applies to exercise as well. The exercise that you're doing may be impacting on your core and floor in an adverse way. Maybe you're doing an exercise that you absolutely love, but it is causing you to leak urine. Equally, maybe you're having to avoid doing exercise or missing out on something that you love doing because you don't feel strong enough through your core and floor, or you're worried about what is going to happen. And whilst we don't necessarily want to avoid doing movement or exercise because of core and floor issues, equally we don't have to make our core and pelvic floor issues worse by carrying on. There is a way around it. Nutrition can impact directly on your pelvic floor health, so particularly aspects like constipation, which are affected by what we eat and drink, have a huge role to play when it comes to pelvic floor health. Pregnancy and childbirth. So pregnancy itself means there's much more weight bearing down onto the pelvic floor. Our centre of gravity changes. There's much more stretch on the abdominal wall, and all of that affects our core and floor function. Even if you have a C-section, then you still are prone to pelvic floor changes, not necessarily weakness, but changes. Plus the fact that you now have a scar across your abdomen can affect how the aspects of your core actually integrate, connect together to support you. Similarly with vaginal births, there can be scarring there if you've had an episiotomy or tearing that will impact how your core and floor integrates. But either way, we need to look at supporting your body, particularly in that first year after childbirth, not just the first 6 weeks, to ensure that it's getting the full support it needs to heal and recover, but also to support you with all the activities that you want to do and enjoying your children. Whether you have children or not, menopause will be there at some point in your life. It differs from woman to woman. The average age for menopause is 51. Now that again has a change on not just your core and floor, but the whole genitourinary complex as well. As estrogen declines, it means that we can get muscular wastage around the genital area. This can change the amount of urinary tract infections you get. It can change how that area feels. Perhaps it feels dry and itchy. Perhaps you're encountering more leakage. And all of these affect, again, how you feel and what you're likely to do. But understanding what's going on in your body can make a huge difference to steps you can take to ease that transition. There's also then looking at core strength versus resilience. As soon as there is an issue with our abdomen, pelvic floor or lower back, people talk about strengthening, but actually we need to understand whether strength is what's needed and actually look at resilience. So the ability to respond to what's going on, including letting go and releasing, not holding on to tension unnecessarily, and that impacts both ways. So if we're holding on too tight through our core and floor when we're moving, that will impact the core and floor, but equally, if what we're doing in everyday life means we're holding on to tension in the muscles around that area, that's going to affect the health and resilience of our pelvic floor in particular. And that can just be things like wearing tight clothes all the time, holding in your belly to make it look flatter, can change the muscular relationship that goes on through this area of our body. Bone health is another key one, and that relates to menopause particularly. But what we know from studies is that there is a high incidence of stress urinary incontinence in those with osteoporosis. Now, we don't know which way the cause goes, but there is a huge correlation between those that have osteoporosis and stress urinary incontinence. So taking steps to support your core and floor, as well as your bone health, can benefit you in avoiding osteoporosis potentially, but certainly in preserving and supporting your body if that becomes an issue for you. So I've mentioned that with spinal health and backache, obviously we tend to just look at the back when this arises, but it's interesting to note that just under 96% of those with backache in a recent study were found to have pelvic floor dysfunction. So it was actually 95.3%, but we won't split hairs on the decimal points. And again, was the backache causing the dysfunction through the pelvic floor or vice versa? It's not really known at this stage, which is why that's a double-staged arrow. But what we do know is if we actually look at the whole core and pelvic floor in alignment with the spine, then that makes a radical difference to backache for many, many sufferers. Body weight has a huge role to play on the core and pelvic floor. So when we are overweight, there is more work to do in stabilising the body, but also the weight bearing down onto the pelvic floor. So, and that one ties in with nutrition as well. Sex life and intimacy. When we're looking at your health overall, it's not just about physical fitness and diet, it's looking at your emotional, physical and psychological well-being as well. And if actually you feel like you can't be intimate or are having to avoid sex because of issues with your pelvic floor, then that is really going to impact your core and floor health and resilience, but your mood and, importantly, confidence. All of these issues can really impact how confident you feel in your own body, how confident you feel to do different things, whether they are physical or related to your work. So taking time to understand how you can support your core and floor rather than just focusing on strengthening all the time can make a major difference to how your core and floor interacts with what you're doing, but how you feel in your body and what you are able to do. And that's kind of, I've gone on a little bit there actually, but that's just a little snapshot of why I get so fired up about core and pelvic floor health. So if any of those points have resonated with you, sparked questions for you, or you just like to chat any of that through, then please don't hesitate to get in touch.